Hi, so I want to talk today about your higher self. And it's really important for us to talk about your higher self because this is a question I get all the time from all of my clients, all my intuitive development classes. It's a really important question. People ask, like, how do I know the difference between my higher self and my ego? Or how do I know the difference between my guides and my ego? So that's what we're going to discuss today. So hi, I'm Melissa Feick. And if you want to become more intuitive, it's really important to understand your higher self and your higher self's voice. Many people want to know their guides, but until you get to know your higher self, your guides are going to have more trouble getting through. Because once you start to feel and know and understand what your higher self sounds like, it'll be easier to start distinguishing between your guides. It's that tiny little voice that leads us toward our life purpose and our goals and our excitement in life. And your higher self is really important because the higher self brings in who you truly are. The higher self is very positive, and the ego, it's not always so positive, and that's a good way to distinguish between the two, because that's the goal. You want to distinguish between your ego, your higher self, and your ego and your guides. The ego holds onto a lot of fear, so if your messages kind of seem fearful, it's most likely your ego. The higher self is that connection to that higher part of you. It's that higher consciousness, right? So it sits around the 8th chakra. And the 8th chakra is right around here. So you have your crown and then your 8th chakra. And your guides, masters, angels, ascended masters, they actually come through your higher consciousness, your higher self, or your 8th chakra to communicate with you. So even if you're interested in contacting your angels and guides and masters, ascended masters, it's really important to start to distinguish between your higher self and your ego, and to connect more to your own higher self, because that's how those guides are contacting you and connecting to you through that higher consciousness. The more you know your higher self voice and your ego voice, the difference between the two, the more intuitive you become and the more intuitive you are. That higher self connects us with our multi-dimensional self. Ourselves on all levels, the truth of who we really are. It guides us with this loving and kind energy. It wants us to recognize the ego and the ego's voice, because it wants us to know what the ego's really doing and what it's creating for us, or hurting us or holding us back. It's that part of our the ego is kind of more that human self, and it's not real. Your higher self knows all about your past lives. And the higher self wants you to know, your higher self wants you to know more about your true self and become more connected with that part of yourself, that truth, that loving part of yourself. The ego will actually try to keep you in fear. The ego's playground is fear. The higher self wants what's best for you. There's the difference. So you need to develop this trust in your higher self and in your intuition. And I have a video on trusting your intuition. Your higher self helps you connect with your higher consciousness. And it's always communicating with you. It's never not communicating with you. You're just not always paying attention or listening. The ego will try to get in the way of your higher self. And the ego's confusing you and trying to confuse the messages. The ego's holding you back from connecting to your higher self. And that's what you really want to understand and know. So your ego's holding you back from actually listening to your higher self, or listening to your guides, or listening to your higher consciousness. It's not a bad thing, it just is. So that voice of higher reason and creative expression is from your higher consciousness, not your ego. And that higher consciousness or higher self will ask you to step out of your comfort zone. Although there'll be a fear there'll be excitement. But it can't always interfere with your conscious will. So your higher self tries to make you aware of the illusion that's around you. The higher self wants you to let go of the ego and of that lower self, and actually wants you to merge more with your higher self. So the higher self wants you to focus on higher vibrational things like creativity, love, source, universal source energy, worthiness, laughter, forgiveness, all those things that you desire in your life. So your higher self, when you're connected to it, you'll feel more joyful, you'll be filled with more love, and you'll see differently from the perspective of the higher self than from the ego. So your higher self knows all your deepest secrets and all the lives that you've ever had without judgment. They know those things. The higher self knows those things without judgment. So your higher self occupies this space in your consciousness, and your ego mind will have less room to be annoying and try to confuse you. So how do you hear your higher self? So easy enough, you pay attention to all your thoughts and feelings. That's really easy, right? No, it's not. But the goal is to try to start. So it's easier to know what the ego sounds like than what the higher self sounds like, because the ego is really kind of loud and obnoxious and your higher self's kind of more quiet. So in the Course in Miracles, it says to associate misery with ego and joy with higher self. That really has helped me. Like, I'm like, oh, no, that's misery. That must be the ego. Because the ego feeds on fear, jealousy, and the story of all that pain and sorrow that you have. And the higher self wants you to feel loved and connected to your higher consciousness. So your higher self usually comes from a higher energy, so you can feel it more here. And your ego kind of feels lower. It feels like it's coming from here. So when you receive a message, ask yourself a couple questions. How do I feel? Do I feel any fear? Is this fear of like, oh my God, no? Or is it like, oh yeah, I want to do it, but I'm afraid? What's your heart saying? So you close your eyes, you go into your heart, and you go, okay, what am I really hearing here? Another thing is journal all the messages and how you felt when you actually received those messages. And then periodically look over them at a later date and kind of see what did they happen, did they not happen, and how you felt about it. This is a fun process. The thing is, don't overthink it. Just pretend that you're playing a game. Like, how intuitive am I? There's your game. How intuitive? Blah. Here's your game. How intuitive am I? Ask for a message a day, even if it's something simple, really simple. Like the message could be like, "Don't forget your car keys. Don't forget to lock your door." So it can be anything like that. Write them down. If you find yourself saying to yourself or to other people, like, I knew what was going to happen, I knew that was going to happen, then it was a message from your higher self. So my son at one point said to me, he went out and played Manhunt as an older child, and he was playing Manhunt and he lost his phone. That's why he was late coming home. And he said, I knew I was going to lose my phone, and I knew not to bring it with me. But he did. So now he knows now he can go back and see, that's what my intuition felt like. That's what it looked like. That's what it sounded like. Now I kind of know what my intuition feels like, sounds like, what my higher self sounds like. So I hope you enjoyed this video. And don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you can experience more opening of your higher consciousness and your intuition. Until then, in loving kindness.